Hello and welcome to Workshop 2, where we're looking at temporary plus and the transition from temporary to permanent cycling infrastructure. I'm here today with Wim van der Wijk, Senior Traffic Engineer at Dutch engineering company Royal HaskoningDHV. Wim's work focuses on policies planning and design for bicycle traffic and pedestrians. We've also got Sophie Edmondson, who's Principal Sponsor for Cycling at Transport for London, and Ruby Stringer, Senior Consultant at Transport Planners ITP. In October, ITP and Royal Haskoning merged their offer to give a wider range of services across the globe. So in this session, we're looking at how we move from the emergency measures that we've seen over the last 6 months or so to more permanent changes. There's a real opportunity now for a green recovery to lock in the changes in travel habits we've seen during the crisis while public transport has been limited, and to come out of the pandemic with towns and cities better equipped for the modal shifts that we need to address the climate, air quality and inactivity crises that haven't gone away. We're going to start the session with a quick fire brainstorm on the sort of measures people have seen implemented or implemented themselves over recent months. So if you just pop those into the chat now, I'll hand over to Wim for the next session. And okay, I'm just trying to find the chat on my, here we go.
Yes, you're fine, Simon.
You can take the floor, Vin. We've not anyone. Yeah.
Okay, then please give the next slide. Well, we'll start this session, and after me, Sophie and Rui will share their part. We will start with well, where we are starting from. So, what are the baseline conditions for the stuff we are discussing about? I'll first show you a few questions on which we want to have some discussion with you after my short presentation. That is the first question: what are the pros and cons of more temporary versus more permanent materials in the emergency phase of implementation? So give me your view on it and your remarks and questions. Also at the pictures and examples that I will show you from both from London and from the Netherlands. And the second question is how and when to decide whether temporary measures should be installed permanent or removed. It doesn't work. You can put it in the chat as well, and after the presentation, we will discuss them. To show you some examples of temporary and some more permanent examples, we have some slides like this. First, for road closure, as you see in London, with only signs, marked with only signs, which is really temporary, has a temporary look and feel as well, or a bit more permanent look, like the right picture with the obstacles in the road. Next, please. In the Netherlands, we do the same, but not that much for blocking roads for the cars, but more blocking roads for cyclists, where they are a hassle for pedestrians to safely walk with enough space and walk around. And that is in a temporary way, also with signs and coaches who stay there to watch and to send cyclists to different places and different roads, or more definitive in the way as you see it constructed in the right picture. Next, please. Another thing is footway widening, because the pedestrians should have more space, enough space to pass by each other safely. It can be done easily by just painting a small strip in the road surface, or more permanent, as we see in these examples from London. In the Netherlands, we have the next slides. We have the same kind of thing. In the left picture, you see an example from Amsterdam, where a separate bicycle path has been changed in a widened footway, widened sidewalk, and the cyclists have to mix up with the car traffic, which means that the car traffic has to really slow down in this space. Here, just behind the cyclist, you can see a tree that is, and behind him is 0, so 30 kilometers per hour as a maximum. But of course, that is very temporary, and it should be more in a more definite way, as it is in the right person picture, where the sign in front in the road shows the words "car as a guest." Next, please. I think adding cycle lanes in the streets can be done easily by putting these plastic barriers in the roads, or a bit more more definitive by adding bullets and making it more safe for the cyclists to cycle behind it. We do the same in the Netherlands in places where we need some more space for cyclists. Next slide, please. Like in this case, you see in the left side, where a traffic lane has been removed and to make more space for the cyclists. In the definite way, it will be a widened cycle lane with a 1 lane less for cars. Next, please. Another example is a place where the road narrows down. Well, the road doesn't narrow down, but the cycle lane narrows down very much under an underpass. That makes it quite dangerous place for the cyclists and difficult to keep distance from each other. And the temporary situation that will be installed in this place is that 1 lane from the cars will be made available for the cyclists, and that traffic will be regulated with traffic lights, one direction after each other. Next, please. How to pass by a bus stop in a safe way. That can be done again with the plastic barriers, or in a much more better definite way with a bypass for cyclists at the back of the bus stop in the shelter, which makes it, of course, much more safe. Next, please. Next slide, please. And then an example of bicycle parking. These are some examples from United Kingdom, where well, there are some temporary or more definitive measures for the cyclists in the road space. The one by putting this this construction, how do you call it, with the flowers in it, where cyclists can be put against, or with this specific facilities for bicycle parking. In the Netherlands, we have also temporary cycle parking facilities. If you can see the next slide, please. We call that a bicycle platform that can be put in place of a car park. So where one car could be parked, there can be parked now 10 bicycles, and this can be easily put there and removed again after a while. But when it is successful, it will be changed in a more definite way with facilities to park your bicycle. especially in locations where there are narrow sidewalks and where parked bicycles on the sidewalk make it too little space to safely pass by for pedestrians. Next one, please. And that's the finally last one. The measure that we take most in the Netherlands as a temporary measure since COVID-19. That is to provide more green time for cyclists in traffic light regulations, so that cyclists don't have to stop that much. It of course improves the bicycle flow and is much more comfortable for cyclists. So that is done a lot, and there are also alternatives for just adding some extra green time for the cyclists, like twice green for cyclists per phase, early bicycle detection, or all directions green at the same time for cyclists. Okay, that were some examples, both from London and from the Netherlands. And then next slide is again the questions as I put in front at the beginning. Simon, do you have any questions or remarks in the chat?
No, we've not got anything from anyone at the moment. So has anyone got anything to ask on Wim's part of the presentation? Oh, here we go. Temporary to permanent filters for low traffic neighbourhoods. Should we be using number plate cameras or fixed bollards?
Well, from this point of view, we should always take as permanent facilities as possible. So bullets have more are a better in our opinion, a better solution than cameras. Also, because cameras need relatively a lot of what is the English word? Sorry, enforcement to get people holding themselves to the routes.
Okay. Anything else from anybody? Or shall we move on to the second part of the presentation?
Great.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Wim. Hopefully you can hear me. I'll just keep talking.
Yes,
yeah, we can hear you.
Fantastic. Thank you. Thought I'd just check. Thank you. Okay, so how do we make it stick? This is part of moving on from those really good examples that Wim had to say, how do we make this decision to change it into a more permanent feature on our road network? I think a few of the things you need to think about at the point when you're reviewing it are, has it worked? Have you seen the benefits that you wanted it to see in the start? Where are you getting your data from? Are you taking a range of sources? Are you looking at your network performance? Are you monitoring things? Are you looking at cycle counts? Are you getting feedback from local residents, opinions from people who pass through the area? So gathering up all of that information to sort of inform your stance on what you do with it is one part of it. The second part is also obviously what you choose to do with it. So there's a few things you could do. You could remove it, you could retain it, you could reconfigure it, or you could replace it. So I'm just going to ease in with a couple of examples that I've got. If you want to go to the next slide, please. So here's just an example where some small fixes can go quite a long way. And it's worth considering how much benefit these sort of things have brought to you compared to how much they cost and how quickly they were able to be implemented. On the left there, we've got some blue paint on the surface. This is probably quite a good solution for a really, really quick change where you want to highlight some conflict for cycling on a key turning point. It might buy you a bit of time when you're looking at the strategic view for an area in terms of changing permitted movements. But on the flip side, potentially it's going to be very expensive to maintain, and maybe you get a bit of sort of fatigue with these things where the measures aren't, I don't know if we want to talk about standards, but I prefer to put something a bit more firm for cyclists there rather than just some coloured paint on the floor. In the middle picture, you can see an upgraded bit of tarmac with a new gully. So this is just an example where if you're putting cycle facilities in quite quickly with wands or painting lines down, you want to make sure that the surface is appropriate for cyclists on there. This is really quite a cheap and quick install to swap a non-cycle friendly gully grate where your wheel can get stuck into a hatch one, which just protects it for cycling. It's the same with patches of tarmac, where it might be really expensive to get the whole asset resurfaced, but it's possible to put little patches of tarmac down to make the level of service for cyclists a bit smoother. This photo on the right-hand side shows where we've blasted off the bus lane to provide a cycle facility. And you just need to be careful on those sorts of things, that you aren't making quite a rough facility for cyclists that isn't attractive. You wouldn't want to put something in and then have people deterred from using it because they don't want to get caught in a pothole or feel like it's really uncomfortable. So in the, just another thing on that, with these types of interventions, it's worth thinking for the permanent view, if you would be able to wayfind these as part of your cycle network. Are these up to a standard that you would say, yeah, we can put a sign up and encourage people to come through this area for a long time in the future? I think that's quite a good measure of if you think that what you've done is going to be able to last as it is, or if you need to change it. The next slide, please. So this is quite an interesting picture. Actually, where the car is parked, it's a bit of a red herring. The car isn't meant to be there. They're meant to be on the right-hand side. So, oh look, there's a little pole. I guess everyone's just filled that in, and Simon, you'll get the responses. So here we've got a cycle facility marked with those double white lines. In those white lines, some wands or what we call pole cones would be installed just to give some light protection for cyclists. This stripy area is what you normally see in a sort of very permanent scheme as a concrete curb, perhaps filled in, so raised up as a buffer zone for cars to park on the right. You have a door zone and a sort of exit point for passengers, and then you have a nice cycle facility that's got a good gap between the two. So yeah, it'd be interesting to know if people think that is acceptable as it is. Oh, okay. So that's quite a definite no there. So I guess thinking about this one, what would be the benefits of putting it in this way? It's very, very quick to put in. You're sort of putting down a pencil line, which you could come back over and put metaphorically in indelible ink. And it gives you an idea of if it's going to work. It's not too difficult to do, very, very cheap. You wouldn't need to buy concrete and close the road to put it in. So a couple of positives for that, but also good to get everyone's opinion. Okay, so looking at this example, we've got a bus stop bypass. This is part of a pop-up cycle route. This obviously is built in temporary materials, so you've got asphalt with rubber curbs, and also these blue barriers, which are just sort of the entry point to the island. I think for this one, it'd be good if you just think about, brilliant, we've got a pole there. Whether you'd retain this for a permanent design, whether you would replace it. So retain it as it is in this current format in that picture, whether you'd replace it and upgrade the materials, or whether you completely reconfigure that layout for this area. And then you see the second question, how much do you think this temporary layout cost? You've got three options there. And okay, we've asked the questions a bit soon, but at the same time, these are just things to think about: what materials you'd use, where you'd get them from. Is there a shortage of these rubber curbs at the moment because they're in demand across the whole nation? How busy are your contractors? Can you get the staff out on site and do this quite quickly? Or are you going to have to wait? And how much your staff and your engineering resources might cost? If you're going to ask this to be done quickly, there's probably going to be a price tag attached to that. Do we have the answers? Okay. Reconfigure, interesting. So how do you approach making this permanent? You can reconfigure it, the majority of you said that. And 80% was spot on, with about £20,000 to build this in the temporary layout. Obviously, that's dependent on how complex an area is, whether you have to close the road to do it, all sorts of things come into that. You'll notice a few things are actually missing from there. For example, your bus flag, your bus shelter, your bin. I can't see any gullies there for any drainage, so you might get some flooding in the cycle facility. I don't know whether the lamp columns are sufficient to provide light on that area. We would have to find out. So that's your costs. In terms of your timelines, on the left here, we've got a permanent layout, and just as your comparison, this one's in Stratford as a bus stop bypass with your paved island, your gully drains, your shelter. You can see it all in place there. Have we got a question on here, Simon?
No question on this one.
No question. Absolutely fine. Okay. So I guess in terms of timelines, I mentioned a few things there. We're missing the shelter. That's a really big piece of infrastructure to move. Often they need power connected to them. You're going to have to line that up with the contractor to get it shifted. Other things to think about in terms of timelines would be how long, well, it's just things to think about, but how long could you leave the temporary bus stop bypass in there in terms of the level of service for both bus passengers and for cyclists? For cyclists, probably not too much of an issue unless it gets flooded, but for bus passengers, potentially there's a problem there, and with having it in this layout for a long time. So again, timelines, they're just all things to think about. Do we have time for this, Simon? We are at time with Ruby's section?
I think it's fine because we started a bit late. I don't know.
Okay.
Yes, I think we're fine. Let's just carry on. I think Ruby's section is slightly shorter. We expected yours to take a bit longer, so.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
Okay, so this is Cycle Superhighway 8, which Will Norman showed in his opening speech. We've got a cycle facility that's with flow, so you can see either side of the road, we've got this cycle facility. It's now got these wands there, so it's like segregation. It's not your tip-top gold-plated thing that you'd expect from maybe 5 years ago, or schemes that have just been delivered, such as CS4. How would you approach making this permanent? I mean, in terms of those ideas of retaining it, seeing what happens with it, replacing it with different materials, for example, concrete, or completely reconfiguring it, I'd be keen to sort of get people's thoughts on this in terms of permanent scheme. This is a temporary layout right now. We may or may not have a poll, or we do. Okay. And then we've got a cost for this one as well. So we've got two costs to guess. One is for this temporary route that you can see in the picture. And then the next question after that will be for a permanent version of this. Just wait for everyone to vote on those three questions. For me, this example is a bit of a red herring because I would be quite comfortable with having this section of the route as it is for a bit longer. I think this would last for a couple of years personally, and provides a good level of service for cyclists. The maintenance costs probably aren't too much. If one of these pole cones was moved, you could probably replace it quite easily. Okay, so we've got the poll results. This is good. Okay, so people are thinking this similar to me, no change or some additional ones or augers to kind of bolster it, but not many of you going for the full concrete curb segregation, which would be really, really expensive, which we'll see in a second, and probably take quite a long time to design up. How much do you think for a temporary cycle route like this? Yep, on the mark there with 400k. I would say that that is per kilometre. You'd look up to £400,000 to put something in like this. I mean, that's probably at the expensive end. You could probably do something for about 200, 250, but it depends on how complex your area is. If you start adding in some junctions, you probably, or you have to shift some utilities under the ground, then you're probably going to push the price up. And then that final question, how much per kilometre per permanent cycle route? 1 million would probably not get you too much. You're probably looking upwards of £2.5, £3 to £5 million per kilometre of cycle route in a permanent format. I don't know if Wim would be able to deliver it cheaper for you in the Netherlands, but that's what we look at here for some of the traditional cycle superhighways.
Yeah, well, in the Netherlands, I think we can do it a bit cheaper. I've worked on one of the first high-speed bicycle routes in the Netherlands, Rijn-Waalpad between Arnhem and Nijmegen, and that cost 17 million for 18 kilometers of cycle routes. So
Okay.
euros, not
So,
not pounds.
Yeah, so even better. So yeah, I think this for me is, you know, everybody is well aware of finances being really constrained at the moment. And this is a big part of what our future delivery is probably going to be shaped by. So I think if we can land on something that's sort of temporary, but a bit plus, which is what we're talking about, which we feel is acceptable to put the network out there in a manner that we'd say would be happy to wayfind, and not too expensive to maintain, then I'd say that that's probably the way forward. It's going to be one of the biggest constraints of all of this. If you push aside sort of political decisions and sourcing materials and having no problem with those sorts of things, how much something costs is going to be a big one. And I think there's merit in saying, if you've put something in for, say, half a year now, and you're not sure if you've realised the benefits that you're wanting, there's probably no harm in leaving it a bit longer as it is, as long as you haven't sort of come across some completely horrible issues or something like that, then maybe leave it a bit longer and observe it. We've seen so much flux with travel behaviours in the last few months. We don't really know anymore what's representative of how people are going to move around in the future relative to how they used to. So seeing it in its place for a bit longer doesn't cost you anything and gives you a bit more information to determine how much you want to spend on moving it forward. It's also worth remembering that it's going to cost a lot of engineering time to work up different options. So if people ask you, well, how about we could do it this way or this way? Could you come back with 3 different options? Even creating those options is going to drain your funds, and you might end up at the end of it with 3 different options, but no money left to pay for a project manager and some materials to go in the ground. So it's just worth balancing up those sorts of things when you're looking at budget versus what you actually want to achieve. I think that's my last slide, is it?
We had a quick question on timelines, how long you think it would take to make them.
Okay, yeah, so this is just thinking about things like a consultation lead-in time, any engagement you might need to do with local authorities, or even if on the network that you're looking to work on, potentially there's some third-party works there at the moment. On this route here on the embankment, you've got things like Thames Tideway already in situ. So you're going to have to work with them, maybe create an interim temporary scheme before you go ahead with your temporary plus one, and just working out if putting something like that in is a false economy, and you're better off waiting until their works are complete, or if you could work around it with some innovation. So yeah, thank you.
And for the third part of the presentation, where I'm handing over to Ruby Stringer.
Great. Can you hear me okay? I think my internet might be playing up slightly, but hopefully you
That's
can hear me.
fine, Ruby.
Okay, good. Thanks, Sophie. That was great. I think a lot of the same principles apply from what Sophie was just talking about with junctions, really. I think junctions kind of present quite a specific challenge in terms of the temporary schemes that have gone in so far, and as such, it's quite difficult to find examples of where they have been put in, because I think for the most part, what we've kind of done with street space measures is kind of very carefully put in and design some great kind of segregated measures on links, because that's where we're kind of able to do that in a relatively low risk manner, and the implications for capacity, the implications for kind of conflict points, and for increasing numbers of cyclists is lower. At junctions, that's not the case. At junctions, we're kind of aware that there are big problems, and for the most part, because of those problems and because it's much more expensive and it's much more complicated, they've actually kind of been ignored from a lot of street space measures. And obviously that presents a huge issue, because that kind of causes cyclists to be spat out at the end of these beautifully segregated cycle lanes into potentially quite big dangerous junctions with no warning. So I'm going to kind of run through an example that we looked at in Camden earlier in the summer, and just kind of run through some of the options. I think I kind of haven't gone anywhere near completely reconfiguring the junction, because I think that's not really in the spirit of temporary plus and kind of what we're looking at the moment. We're trying to think about how we can level up a bit from the situation we're in at the moment, not how we can provide kind of gold standard Dutch level cycling infrastructure across the whole of London in the next 9 months or whatever it may be. So if you could just flick to the next slide, please, Simon. So this isn't a brilliant aerial photo, but hopefully you can kind of see what's going on. This is the junction between Finchley Road going north to south and Adelaide Road going east to west. And what we were kind of considering is putting in a, what would it be, westbound cycle lane along Adelaide Road and kind of crossing this junction. And so we kind of got to the end of the road and it got to this junction, and then we needed to kind of figure out what our options would be. So Simon, if you could just flip to the next slide, it just shows some of the kind of traffic directions. So this is where, just because it's quite a complicated junction, I thought it was useful to kind of show where the cars were heading. You've got this, if you imagine you're heading kind of from the right to the left on a bike, you've got this kind of left turn situation, which isn't ideal. And then you've got 2 lanes of general traffic going straight across the junction. And I think that was the thing that caused the main kind of issue. And I suppose in terms of what's available to you without just completely reconfiguring everything and creating a kind of cycle superhighway, separate phases for bikes kind of approach, I think there are kind of 4 or 5 main things that are available to you. So the first one, if you could just flick forward one more, Simon, is you put in some, haven't done a great diagram of that, but it's just put in some nice big long advanced stop lines there, which kind of allows bikes obviously to get ahead of all the traffic and just gives them a bit more of a head start. The problem here, of course, is with that left turn, the ASL is then in the way of the cars turning left. So then what you could do in the next slide is you could ban that left turn completely, depending on what kind of powers you have and whether you can do that and everything. And I think another thing, and I know that one of the reasons that junctions have been particularly sticky is that a lot of them are a bit conflicted over whether they're TfL responsibility or borough responsibility, and that's been a bit of a kind of a conflict point in terms of whose responsibility it is to be doing this, and who kind of needs to be doing the traffic modelling and capacity testing and things like that. I think other options that you have available is to, if you go to the next slide, is to put in some kind of early release or some kind of cycle phasing. I think this is something which Vim was saying is really easy to implement when you've already got these cycle signals in place. It's really quick to change up the timings. You can give huge amounts of cycle priority almost immediately with relatively little cost. I think in the situation in London is obviously that that has a really big potential knock-on effect on capacity, which if you aren't able to model can obviously ruffle some feathers. And also the kind of status of the traffic signals themselves may not be up to scratch and may not allow them to be implemented, in which case you then have to kind of install an entirely new system, which is not cheap. And then finally, you can, I think one of the things that's really kind of Wim pointed this out, but I think it's a really good point, is that just removing space from cars makes cyclists safer in just by the virtue of there being lower capacity for traffic. And that kind of is the same principle that's being applied through LTNs, and I think is something we can kind of continue to be applying everywhere, like reducing road capacity and kind of that reallocation of road space that we're talking about. I think junctions are kind of where it kind of reaches crunch time, and if we're going to just say a lot of nice words about road space reallocation and how important the kind of road user hierarchy is, this is kind of the point where we have to really commit to that. And if we really do want a reallocation of road space, then we have to commit to a loss of capacity for other modes, and that is kind of where that big point of commitment comes. So to me, I think those are the main options that are available in terms of creating safer junctions in a kind of temporary plus way without kind of reconfiguring junctions altogether. I'd be interested, firstly, if anyone's got any other suggestions that I've forgotten about, because obviously that would be interesting. And also, I suppose one thing to mention is I am aware that it's not a kind of fully representative junction. And that's something that's really important to remember, is every single kind of situation. I think more so than link segregation, I think junctions have to be considered on a really case-by-case basis. And that is one of the things that makes them even more expensive to upgrade. So I don't know, Simon, have we got a little poll on what we think are, so if we kind of consider that example of those things that I kind of have suggested as potential options, do we think that any of them are kind of nice to haves but would not be necessary, or do we just think that we should go as hard as we can, chuck in everything that's possible?
I didn't actually manage to set up a poll for this one, so if people have any
yeah,
thoughts,
we can just have a chat about it. I also
we've got a question from Alawe. Sorry if I've pronounced that wrong. Priority pedestrian crossings or Copenhagen crossings or zebra crossings at unsignalised junctions. They're popular in Waltham Forest. Should we be considering them for elsewhere? Do they work well?
Yeah, I think, I suppose, as always, I think it depends on the context and it depends on the specific layout of what you're looking at. I know that there are problems with them. People have concerns that they're not kind of always, they don't always feel super safe for people with visual impairments or for kind of children. They don't delineate the carriageway enough. But I think that where it's kind of where the traffic flows are low enough and everything, I think that they're, yeah, I think they're a good addition. Sophie, I don't know if you've got any thoughts on that. Or
yeah, I mean, I know that, for example, Camden were keen to put Copenhagen crossings on the side roads. I'm thinking of Wim might be able to help me out. There's crossings like a scramble zone in, there's one in Groningen where I think we need a bit of a push to the DFT or a national guidance to say, are we happy to accept that conflict or potential conflict between cycle and cycle and pedestrian in that zone? And because really it makes a good use of the time if you allow everybody to go at once who isn't a motor vehicle. But I think those things need to be brought to the fore a bit more and said, if we are going to do what Ruby said, and commit to this reallocation and focus on those hotspots, which are the junctions, then these are ideas that need to be elevated up the decision-making chain a bit faster and a bit more firm. That's my take on it.
Yeah, well, in the Netherlands, we consider that if you take away, if you are able to take away space from the cars, from car traffic, and you provide that to cyclists and pedestrians, then you create a much more livable and safe and nice place to be situation for both cyclists and pedestrians. And the conflict between the both cyclists and pedestrians, they can much more easily solve the problem by themselves, because a pedestrian has no doesn't need any space to stop, to break down and stop, while a car needs quite some space, especially when he's driving faster than 20 miles an hour or something. And cyclists the same. They can also stand still in a moment compared to cars. So it's much more safe and comfortable and easy for them to solve their conflicts in a smooth way than for cars.
I actually had a question which I was thinking about when Sophie was speaking, but it's kind of for everyone, anyone who wants to answer it. If we have, it's a hypothetical question, but if we have a kind of finite amount of money and you had to choose, is it better to put in kind of temporary plus type measures across the whole of London, or to put in like full gold standard permanent measures in selected locations?
I've got my opinion on that.
Yeah, go on.
It's probably to echo what Will said at the start of this conference, which was to try and realise benefits as quickly as we can across the whole city. And for me, that would be to put in Temp Plus as the new look of our permanent schemes. We don't need to source, sandstone stuff from China and bring it over and fly in different pieces of materials because we're running out of them. And we don't need in 4 years to then have to worry about finding those materials in the future, because they're simplified and they're replaceable, and you could store a lot of things here. Instead of a practical sense, I think it would work better in delivery and in maintenance. But in terms of level of service, potentially we would need to sort of almost alter our expectations, or not lower standards, just alter the expectations of what the facilities might look like.
Yeah.
Yeah, as a campaigner, I think I'd support that, because I think the important thing, what we know from the Netherlands is that you only really get mass modal shift when you've got a complete network. So anything that enables us to build out the complete network more quickly is a really good thing. If we can build out the complete network by 2030 instead of 2040, we're going to see London change for the better.
I agree with that, and then with having said that, I would say focus on the spots that are probably the most difficult to solve, but also the most important, because that are the most times the bigger junctions where the unsafety is the biggest, and you have to solve these places to make people feel comfortable to cycle.
Yeah. Okay, we probably need to wrap up there. So I'm just going to post the link to get back to the main room in the chat. The speakers, we can hang around in here for a little while if we want to have a quick debrief, but then I've got to pop over to the main room to sum up this meeting. So thank you to everyone who's attended. I think that was a really useful session. Thank you to our speakers, Sophie Edmondson from TfL, Wim van der Beek from Royal Edmondson, and, sorry, I've got that wrong, haven't I? And Ruby Stringer from ITP. Wim is from Dutch engineering company Royal HaskoningDHV. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks.